2024 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. For public comment today, after I open an item for public comment, those joining us by Zoom webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raise hand button located in the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you're joining over the phone, you can press *9. PCTPA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated they wish to speak. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during this meeting, please email your comments to solvysable at ssabol@pctpa.net. Thank you. And Mr. Joyner, would you please lead us in the flag salute?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Solvi, could we get a roll call, please?
Broadway,
Here?
Burris, Cortez,
Here.
Dowden Calvillo,
Present.
Holmes,
Here.
Howdeshelt,
Here.
Joyner,
Here.
Jones, Wilkins. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda today is agenda review. Matt?
There we go. Nothing has changed on the agenda, Chair.
Matt, were we going to move the closed session
Oh, I
on
apologize.
the agenda?
Yeah, I think the request is because of Supervisor Holmes has a commitment this morning. We were going to move up closed session item M to right after approval of the minutes.
Do you want to approval of the minutes, or do you want to provide public comment first?
We can provide public comment.
Why don't we do that?
Okay.
Okay. All right. And with that, no other changes, Matt?
No.
Great. All right. Perfect. Thank you so much. And the next item on our agenda is AB 2449. Matt?
Chair, everybody's present. No actions needed.
All right. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for December 6, 2024. Those have been posted online and were distributed electronically to the board. Are there any changes needed in the minutes? There being none, can I get an action on the minutes, please?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes for the December 6th meeting. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed or abstentions? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on any item that is not on our agenda today. Please limit comments to 3 minutes. Is there anyone here in chambers that wishes to provide public comment today? There being no one in chambers, do we have anyone online? We do not. Great. As Matt had explained, we are going to move item M next on our agenda. That is a closed session item. We have 2 items today. The first is closed session pursuant to Government Code 54957, Public Employee Performance Evaluation Executive Director. The second is closed session pursuant to Government Code 54957.6, Conference with Labor Negotiator, Agency Designated Representative, Agency Chair, Unrepresented Employee, Executive Director. Is there anyone, before we move into closed session, anyone from the public that wishes here in chambers to comment on this item? There being none, do we have anyone online? Wonderful, thank you. With that, we will move to closed session. Matt, where are we meeting? Yeah, I got it. Thank you. All right, the board has returned from closed session. I want to thank everyone for your patience relative to closed session. There is nothing to report out. I did want to notify the public that member Burris did join us. She dialed in for the discussion. She was not able to due to technical issues prior. And so she did join us for the closed session. She is dialing now via Zoom, and board member Holmes did have to depart. So he is not joining us here after closed session. And we will now return to our regular meeting. We will begin with item G, consent calendar. These are items that are routine and non-controversial. They'll be acted upon by the board with one action without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested citizen may request that an item be removed. Is there any item from today's consent calendar that the board wishes to remove? There being none. Anyone from the public here in chambers wish to remove an item from the consent calendar? So before we do that, let me just check with Sylvie online. Sorry, I apologize, but thank you.
I'll move approval.
All right. Wonderful. We have a motion and a second to approve today's consent calendar. Any further discussion? There being none, we need to take a roll call vote because we do have a dial-in member.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Cortez,
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo, Howdeshelt,
Aye.
Joyner,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Wilkins. Motion passes.
Wonderful. Thank you. The next item is item H, Equity Planning Study, 2024 Equity Policy Plan. I believe Mike and Corey will be presenting that item today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the board. Mike Costa. I'll go ahead and start off this presentation, and then I'll introduce our communications team led by Kendall Flint to deliver the presentation. But just to get a start, some of you may recall that back in August, staff came to the board to present an item and the start of what we were calling an equity study. And the importance of that study was for a few different reasons. One is recognizing that in the current conditions right now, both at the state and federal level, equity is a big part of discussions that go into funding decisions. And so having some level of documentation and policies relevant to equity can help our agency with competing against federal and state funding dollars, which is why we pursued this equity study that we're presenting to you today. And then also we're proposing some policies for adoption as well. The second part is that complementary to the efforts that are going on at the 6-county SACOG region level, PCTPA wanted to define what equity meant for our region, recognizing that we have unique circumstances and unique conditions that we want to define so that when we approach equity in our region, we are looking at it from a Placer perspective. And so one of the things that you'll see in these policies that are proposed and in our study altogether is that we are really looking at Placer and what does equity mean in Placer County. And we're also looking at how can we use equity as one of many lenses upon which we look at projects. It's not going to be the final factor, the final consideration factor in our project decision making or our investment decisions, but it will be one of many tools, one of many lenses that you'll see as we present some policies, and you'll also see an equity index that we've identified for your consideration, that this is how we're approaching equity in Placer County. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and actually turn it over to Kendall Flint, and she'll walk you through our study and our proposed policies.
There I am. And I agreed to do this presentation only if I got to hold the clicker. And Mike assured me that that would be possible. But good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
You can't use it, but you can.
I can use it. He said I could use it. I'm in charge for the next 15 minutes. I'm here today to really talk with you about the process that we went through to develop these equity policies. And you may remember when we spoke in August, Placer County is not Sacramento County, is not San Francisco County, is not Los Angeles County. And while each agency has its own unique characteristics, Placer has its own too. So it was very important to us to look at this particular population and develop a set of policies that would make it useful, sustainable, and frankly, doable for this particular agency. We're not looking to do things that are going to increase costs, that are going to have requirements that are draconian, but rather set policies in place that are in sync with what we need in this county. So one of the things we looked at, obviously, was identifying the population for analysis. I'm going to show you some really neat tools that we use to do that, and talking with people from a qualitative standpoint about what their concerns are. And I think, again, as I mentioned, in some areas, people say, gosh, I really want to have sidewalks, curbs, and gutters. I know places in Placer County that would actually get very angry if you put in sidewalks, curbs, and gutters. So it's important to know what folks want to see in this area. So to do that, we looked at quantitative data, which is basically the things you're used to seeing, census data, the things that the federal government provides us. But we also looked at what's called a system called My Sidewalk. And this allows us to get into a much deeper dive that's specific to this area, distance to a stop sign, or distance to a park, distance to a transit center, how many cars are in each household, what languages are spoken, the need to go to medical appointments and where they're going to. So all these things were used to sort of shape what their challenges might be within this community. And I'd like to point out that the PCTPA is also using this to influence the development of the regional transportation plan. So this is a public-facing dashboard. Anybody can go on there and take a look and see what's unique about this area or look for different types of metrics. And I'd also point out that PCTPA members can look and see what specific things are there for your individual communities. So if you wanted to see what was happening in Rockland or Auburn or any place else, you could do that as well. Now, we match that with the qualitative side, which is a series of focus groups, specifically with seniors, students, people that are going to and from schools. We also talked with folks that are Spanish-speaking members. And I'd like to really thank Latino Coalition for working with us to help identify these folks and hold those meetings. So one of the things we wanted to do is make sure we were asking consistent questions across all of these different groups, and that we were coordinating these efforts with others that were being done by WSP and other projects and programs that you're looking at. So we're only having the focus groups once rather than doing them for transit and for the RTP and for equity. So we were able to get a lot of mileage out of those. Now, when we look at these policies, I'm not going to read every single one of them for you. I think you've got those in your agenda packages, but I'm going to give you some highlights. We really broken this down into 5 different areas. And it's important to note that the federal government and the state government already has some policies in place, Title VI, things we see with California Environmental Quality Act. So these are not duplicative of those, but they are unique and set aside. So we would be looking at not replacing any of those things, but this is just another tool. The 5 areas we looked at: engagement, services, infrastructure, environmental, and technology. So we're starting out by saying, what is equity? And the definition this is, for us, inclusion in the planning and benefiting from the region's multimodal transportation network so that everyone can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. You'll notice that that is an intentionally broad piece. It is not segmenting out any one population, but rather saying that everybody that lives here, everybody that works here, should have those same benefits. We're also talking about, again, minor things, and there's a couple here that I think are very interesting and unique. So when we look at the outreach policies, including underrepresented or underserved communities in this area, that can mean working with seniors. That can be working with the, people of color. That can be meaning working with your tribal folks. But really making sure that there is a priority when a project comes up, that you're looking to see who's affected, and from a policy standpoint saying we're going to do our best to try to reach out to those folks and make sure they're included. The other part of this is to figure out if there's ways to develop partnerships with some of those agencies that are serving people. So in this particular instance, if we're talking about a Latino group, we might look for a Latino advocacy group, such as we did in this process, and find ways to provide them with micro grants and ways to compensate them for their assistance. This is not only good for the local economy, but it's also more cost effective from hiring an outside consultant or overburdening staff, right? You're actually dealing with people that are working on this on a daily basis. So we feel like this is a really good policy to have, and one that you're seeing not just in California but everywhere, because we know that when you're already an advocate community, whether you're a senior advocate, a housing advocate, whatever it is, you're more likely to be successful in those outreach efforts. When we look here, the next two policies really talk about encourage other agencies, member agencies, encourage contractors to adopt these same policies. You'll notice that it does not say require, and that is intentional. It would encourage infers that we're liking to ask people to do as we do, to take a look at these and see if you can make it work, but we're not requiring that. It's just a way of saying we want to be all on the same page with that. We feel that that would be easy to do too. And then this last one, which I think is really interesting, is changing contracting procedures. If you've ever seen some of the ways that agencies go about this, it normally requires very high insurance requirements, things like this. And if you've got a small nonprofit, they may or may not be able to qualify on that. So when you're talking about minor projects that involve outreach and engagement, waiving those pieces make it easier for those folks to be able to apply to implement those kind of micro grants. We're talking about smaller dollar amounts, clearly under 50,000. We're not talking about building bridges or anything like that, but just in the engagement side. And you'll see that both MTC, SACOG, and other agencies are implementing that now. It makes sense. And again, it develops stronger partnerships where you're not just relying on these folks, but you're actually compensating them for doing that work. And of course, you're already doing this. I'm not even going to have to get into much reading on this, but collaborating with other agencies is what this agency does. The only change on that is really including those community service districts, utility providers, anybody who's got an interest in the county and has an interest in transportation. Setting that collaboration as a key is very important and does help you from an equity standpoint. Infrastructure, pretty straightforward. This is looking that everything is fair. You're not really going to be setting up, in fact, nobody in California does now, projects that bifurcate a community, right, that negatively impact someone where you're going to drop a highway through somebody's neighborhood. It makes pretty common sense, but it's important to document that that, in fact, is what you're going to do, not have an unnecessary negative effect. Some of these are already looked at as part of the California Environmental Quality Act, as you know, but again, it's memorializing that and making sure that when we do have services, that they are equitable and accessible to everyone. That's one of the things also as you look at things like microtransit and the ability to have smaller vans that are moving people about on demand. Those are the kind of things that make it easier for folks to participate. Encouraging physical devices in kiosks and whatnot to communicate as it regards bus schedules, things like this. We heard this across all of our outreach, both from the RTP, from this, and the idea is if you are at a bus stop and there's no way of knowing when the next bus is coming, when it's going to be there, if it's delayed. It encourages the use of electronics and other things to make this more adaptable, more flexible for folks that use it. And again, if it is needed, it allows you to do that in multiple languages. So this is, again, an encourage, not a require, an encourage to make sure that happens, and also encouraging bilingual support during emergency services and things like that. We're already seeing that with Caltrans and a lot of our first responders, but again, it's just a policy that we want to have in there to make sure that it is looking forward at that. Now, you may think this one is a little bit strange. Why would we talk about broadband? A lot of folks in this area don't have good internet in their area where they live or work, right? And so if you don't have broadband, number one, you're not able to commute from home or work from home. So that's one of those areas where encouraging that, Caltrans is doing that as well, looking for opportunities. It not only sets the stage for making it more equitable for people to work from home in rural communities, but it also helps us set up connections with intelligent transportation systems, which can be implemented for everything from controlling lights to controlling traffic signals and whatnot in areas. It doesn't apply to everywhere, but it does apply in general to everyone across the board. And then looking with local agency partners to establish that last mile, again, those connections. And that's really when you get up into the more rural areas. And we heard that a lot, especially from some of our senior folks and those that live on the larger, ranchettes out. They can't get to it. So they can't have the grandkids come stay with them and, go to school from home. They can't do a lot of other things. So it's just a good piece there. These are all basic, looking at coordination for funding for electric mobility, that sort of things. Won't go into too much detail there. When it comes to services, this is ensure proposed projects addressing unmet needs for seniors and individuals with disabilities really work with these folks and also include not only fixed route, but perhaps some other alternatives. Again, you're already doing this. This just sort of memorializes that particular piece moving forward. And looking at cross-jurisdictional collaboration in equity, so that if we know that one agency is doing something that you can benefit from or you can share an initiative on, you want to do that. And again, that's part of the reason that PCTPA exists, in order to do that. And this is specific also to folks that need medical care. We did hear from some folks, as an example, if you are using Medicare, you may or may not have a doctor that's in close proximity to you. So the ability for you to be able to access bus service or point-to-point service or some other means to get you there is important. And there are a number of other types of projects and programs that can be implemented, such as reimbursement for a second driver, looking again at that on-demand thing, subsidizing things. It's not saying that you're going to do any of those in the specific. It's saying that you're looking for ways that are sustainable and cost-effective to make that happen going forward. Obviously, ensuring that public and active transportation are accessible and dependent communities have the ability to access those. And this also includes zero-emission vehicles. So when and if things come up, some people may have seen zip cars or those sort of things. With electric vehicles, ensuring that if it's available to be in a low-income area or someplace that maybe didn't have that before, that gives some consideration. All modes of transportation, again, these are very, very specific to the general theme of let's make sure things are accessible for all. And then working with the transit operators. You have a meeting this afternoon that's going to be talking about transit operators, and it's ensuring while PCTPA is not the transit operator, it's working with those folks to establish policies and programs that are then accessible to all. These last two are pretty short. Environmental policies, educational programs to assist greater use of transit. We heard from many, many seniors, and there are programs that we are working on right now through SPARTA and others. They don't know how to get to a bus. They don't know how to use a bus system. They don't know what's available to them. So just ensuring that the education is there, that people know what is available, because their use of these systems clearly reduces greenhouse gas emissions and then makes it better for everyone. From an equity standpoint, it tends to be people. My dad knows the bus stations and every station stop. He's 86 years old. He can do it, no problem. His neighbor, not so much. So it's just making sure we're bringing everybody up to speed so that they know how to access that. And then finally, on the technology side, it's supporting data platforms that really promote system-wide intelligent transportation systems integration, right? The more we do that, the more efficient we are, the better services we can provide, and the easier people have to access it, whether that's through smartphones or an electronic billboard or whatever that is, it's just making it easier. Now, as Mike mentioned, we have a separate document, and I want to be clear, this is not a scorecard, it is a checklist. And it's kind of like the way I explained it to one is, think about you're going on a vacation, and if it's a warm place, these are the things you need to bring. If it's a cold place, these are the things you need to bring. These are 7 areas that we're simply asking staff to look at and consider when preparing staff reports or recommendations to this board so that you can all make informed decisions. And they're pretty basic: cost of service, accessibility, adequacy of service, proximity, how close it is to people, environmental impacts, what does it really do in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions or improving a community, economic impacts, and of course, safety. So there's no score here where you get a point for each of these things, because not all projects are going to have those things as an issue that they need to be concerned about, right? But when you do have those that do tick those boxes, it's just making sure you're considering that as part of the overall process for moving forward. Now, I'm available to answer any questions you might have about the process, the program, but I think just to reiterate, the reason for doing this is because, as was mentioned before, both in California at the federal level, they're looking at agencies and wanting to know that people are taking a good look at equity and equity policies in a meaningful way. And the idea here is to memorialize these as part of your ongoing efforts. Some of the policies that don't appear in this particular document are going to appear later in the RTP. These are complementary to your public participation plan, so they're not going to replace requirements from Title VI or from the California Environmental Quality Act or any other things that you have out there. These are a separate set that enhance those. And as time goes by, we would suggest that you review these policies every 3 to 5 years and see what has changed, what is new, and so forth and so on. We did go back and forth about whether this would be an accept or adopt in terms of the policies. Adoption, we felt, was a stronger message to the public and to also those agencies that you're applying for, that you're saying, yes, we view this as important, we think that these are valuable steps, and we think that this will be positioning us for a healthy, sustainable future for all of our residents in the future. So with that, myself, Mike, and Corey are ready to answer any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you, Kendall. Any questions from the board?
I do.
All right.
Kendall, great presentation.
Thank you.
All right. I only have 40 questions. And thanks for the emphasis on encourage. And I want to be constructive in this. So first question is policy E 1.2 versus policy I 3.0 or 2.0. So that it's about language and translation. So is this layering? Are these separate approaches? I mean, one in 1.2. I mean, E 1.2.
Okay.
Sorry.
I know, EIEIO.
Right.
Okay.
So improve communication channel and demographics. 1.2, reduce language and access barriers, provide translation materials for public review. So that's hard copy or?
So in the doesn't show the footnote, but in the actual document, there's a footnote that says that it's basically like the fact sheet, the executive summary, the limited. It's not saying, there you go. Exactly. It's not saying you're going to translate the entire thing. It's saying that these are some basic ones. Whenever we do social media posts for PCTPA, we put them in English and in Spanish. And then it also says that, you know, if someone, and you're already doing this, if someone wants a different language and they may call in and say, I need Tagalog, I need Chinese, whatever that is, which actually is a requirement, you would try to do that. The difference between 1.1 and 1.2, 1.2 really talks about Latino Coalition and other of those types of groups. So if you have partnerships with folks that are already speaking Spanish, which is kind of how we did this, then you're able to have them do these meetings and help support that with live translation. So we did meetings that were specific to them. So this was kind of specific to the outreach side. And if I go to infrastructure, there's a mention, I think
2.0 and
I think that's the one you're talking about.
yeah.
On that one,
Encourage physical
yeah,
devices.
so this is a little different. On the outreach side for engagement, you know, we're having a public workshop or a meeting. We want to make sure that those documents are accessible. This is, and this is an encourage because you may or may not be in charge of delivering that service, but let's say I'm sitting at a bus stop. We would like to encourage that bus stop, if possible, to use electronic signage and have the ability to have those be bilingual. So you'll see those sometimes in other markets, right? It'll say like,
Gotcha.
next bus in blah, blah, blah. My colleague speaks fluent Spanish. I can order food, but that's about it. But it would say in Spanish, the next bus is in this much minutes.
Right, and we have
Yep, there you
we
go.
have technology that does that for
That's
us.
exactly right.
And we're a jurisdiction that has Colfax and Loomis in it, and then Roseville and Rockland and
Right.
Auburn. Right. So the preamble is we have to look at this from that size and scale, and so where appropriate, the
Right.
language where appropriate.
Right.
I think is an important thing to add into a number of these things, right? Because you could look through the equity lens as that, oh gosh, I'm going to forget the term. You know, the time between buses, right?
Yes.
Head time or something like
Head
that?
time, yep.
Right. That might not be equitable, right? I mean, that could be an equity lens that people look at and measure and challenge us on.
You're
In
absolutely
Colfax, that looks very different than in Roseville.
right. So for Roseville, you'd have maybe every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, and in more
Right.
remote locations, that might be every 30 minutes or even every hour.
Yeah.
So I think that's the wheres on there would be an easy fix for us to make as an amendment.
Yeah.
So if you choose to move forward, we can do that as amended with where added in there.
Can you go to E 2.2?
Yep.
Oh, there's no,
Oh, hold on, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, engagement from, it's engagement policy, right?
yeah.
Okay. Let me go back up there. Here we go.
All right. Encourage contractors providing engagement services for PCTPA. So these are planning, engineering, but not construction.
Correct. Well, let me rephrase that. If I'm in a construction zone, right? And again, this is another place where your where would become very important. But if my construction zone is in an area that has both Spanish and English-speaking folks, then when you have the signs that are usually up that says detour this way, you would want to encourage them to make sure they're in Spanish. The interesting thing about this one, we kind of went back and forth. You know, to be honest, the contractors, when an RFP is released by PCTPA, it's going to stipulate a lot of that stuff. So in that way, it's probably a redundant policy, but we just wanted to kind of call it out to say, yeah,
Thank you. Here's the big question. Have you run this by the Building Industry Association?
We've implemented these in other places, so yeah, they're aware
Have
of
you run
that.
this by
Our specific one,
our
I've been talking
local-
to John Helmer in the last, but I can,
Building Industry Association?
right, BIA.
Yeah, that's not the right name, though.
It's,
So.
yeah, yes, we can certainly,
Yeah, so Jeff Short here in Placer County should see that,
okay.
because that looks an awful lot, feels an awful lot like project labor agreements. And, you know, the chair has public comment at his meetings from folks who would certainly like to, you know, leverage that. Can you go to 3.0? And thank you, board, for your indulgence. Contracting embarrassment. So my question here is, a community-based organization is or isn't similar to an NGO?
An NGO meaning a nonprofit?
A non-governmental organization?
No, they're different. So a non-governmental organization, I could be a non-governmental, I could be a non-governmental agency, say that 5 times, as a private firm. Community-based organizations, by their very nature, are usually servicing advocacy and or community service. So the specific intent of that is for if you have, you know, as the example, Latino Coalition, or in other areas we have other names, you know, senior co-siders, other people that are providing specific engagement services, that they would be able to apply for through a process, work on some of these projects as they pertain to engagement, not as they pertain to construction or anything else, but specifically for engagement.
Okay.
And so that's what that's intended to
In
be.
Roseville, we have neighborhood associations, not homeowners associations.
If the neighborhood association is providing an engagement, I'll give you a perfect example. If someone was, let's say, doing, so you've got a neighborhood watch group or fire safe council or something like that that's operating. If that fire safe council is providing education and engagement for their local community, and you have a project that is going to impact that, whether it's, you know, wildfire mitigation, anything else, yes, then that group could apply for that and potentially do it. Now, fire safe councils are, again, nonprofit. They are not, they're not a for-profit agency, so we're really talking about that. And that probably would be a good addition to say community-based nonprofit organizations, just to call that out.
Okay, and then I just have 2 more questions. T 4.0? Support, okay. Oh, you went past it.
I'm sorry.
I feel like I'm at the optometrist.
Oh,
Is this better or this is better?
Yeah.
Right? T 4.0.
yes, I think it's farther. T is technology.
Yeah, so the word support there. Is that meant to be, send a letter of support, or does that mean financial support?
That would be at the discretion of the board.
I like that answer a lot. And then you talked about, I didn't write down this, the middle mile and the last mile?
Yeah, that has a redirection to, I'll come back, gosh, I keep doing the wrong way on this.
That's okay.
That relates to broadband. So
Yeah.
Caltrans has got a number of issues or number of programs right now where they're actually encouraging, and we're seeing this also at the state and
But what I
federal.
didn't understand was you said on state designated highways,
Yes.
But then you wandered off the exit ramp to say that communities may not have strong broadband. So is this transportation specific or communities adjacent to?
These are two, and that's it. It's a great clarification. So the top one, on Caltrans facilities, one of the things they're doing is if they're going to do a roadway improvement project or something, they're looking at, okay, we're already digging up the road, let's put broadband down, right? So that's a Caltrans facility. The other ones here are in the local community level. So let's say that the city of Auburn is looking at, extending broadband out further, that you would be encouraging that. So there's that's why there's two different policies. They're two different things.
So, and this might be a Corey question, but are we adopting something that has for 1 year or in perpetuity? Is this ongoing?
It's an ongoing, and that's why I say I encourage the board to, and you can actually put that in if you like, I encourage you to review it every 3 to 4 years. And the reason for that is because as we've seen with climate action plans and other things change from a policy level over time, and there may need to be adjustments, or you might find that some things are not working for you appropriately, or there may be something that we left out that we didn't identify as part of this.
Great, and this is my last question, I promise. E 1.0. Why is it? It's environment. We have two E's in here?
We have two E's, I just
Oh,
realized
that
that.
screws that up.
I'll
But
make
the
the other
one
one
that's the
Ian.
environmental one?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So we know from polling that people prefer auto trips, right?
Yes.
It's actually more equitable in my mind because you're not waiting for other forms of transportation, all right? So this is where I'd suggest some language, and that language would be, where appropriate and grant funding exists, provide educational programs and assistance to encourage and enable, where appropriate, and grant funding exists, greater use of transit in place of auto trips. So, thank you, everybody, for indulging me in all those questions.
Okay. Other questions from the board? No? Trinity?
I just have a comment, but not a question. Do you want me to refrain?
If you want, we'll take public comment and I'll bring it back.
Okay, great.
Any comment from Trinity? Okay, great. In Chambers wish to comment on this item?
Good day, Michael Garabedian. Well, the short-sightedness of this body and the county planning for transportation is evident even in this. You're trying to help people get transportation, and there's nothing but gridlock ahead, and there's nothing to deal with that. Even the token transit and stuff is not going to do anything for the people in the future. The classic example is Sutter, with buying land from a developer and locating where it doesn't have freeway access and has congestion to get people emergency there, which is basically the same process with the whole area of the Placer County Conservation Plan, being overdeveloped without transportation with service. People are already waiting for, cars don't wait, cars here wait on 65, and they're going to be waiting forever until you figure out something, look at something serious and some kind of big transit project or train, something is necessary, or you should just stop building houses because it's going to be a nightmare. I mean, I'm not saying you should stop building houses, but there's a serious problem there. The question is, when is this county going to wake up and do something that is going to get people, allow people to go somewhere? I don't see it. This is the same old here. Maybe there's a little hope. The District 3 Caltrans director is now gone, and his primary interest was widening, supposedly relieving congestion. It never does, much like I've complained about the so-called auxiliary lane there at Douglas, and what's going on in downtown Sacramento, trying to add more lanes and causing congestion to build it and again forever. So how are people going to get emergency service or even get to the hospital in a reasonable way when they may not have a car? So I think that's the equity here and fairness here. The people who are going to be hurt the most are ones who are going to have trouble getting to the hospital or getting anywhere. And I don't know what to say. I don't think I'm going to say anything that's going to wake you up. But a major change is needed.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in chambers from the public that wishes to comment on this item? Being none, do we have anyone online that wishes to make a comment? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Eklund, you're free to speak.
Yes, thank you very much. I've made a prepared statement, but in listening, and I've read the document very thoroughly. I have a couple since the author of the study there is there. I'd like to ask. I'm going to deviate a little bit because I have some questions to ask that I think are important, and I couldn't squeeze into a 3-minute statement. The most important thing item in a transit system is its bus stop. The most important item at a bus stop is its bus sign. Within Rockland, the bus stop infrastructure is extremely poor. It isn't even located in some locations where the bus stops. And the worst bus stop in America exists on one of its stops. The bus sign is totally useless for anybody who is an LEP, low English proficiency. And it needs to be totally revamped. These are basic issues, and I went through and I looked through the document, with search. There's no mention of anything having to do with a bus stop. Research already shows that bus stops are the entry to the bus system, and they create awareness by the general public. The less awareness for public transit in Rockland is due to poor bus stop design and amenities. There are no benches whatsoever in Rockland except at 8 shelters. Shelters and benches are extremely important for seniors and handicapped so they have a place to sit. If they don't, they are unlikely to use fixed route transit even if they want to. So the absence of bus stops is a totally unnecessary omission and should be added. And the focus groups are great, but there has been no public workshop regarding this study. And some of the obvious on-the-ground issues really rely on somebody driving a bus route, just driving where the bus routes occur and looking at the infrastructure. I've asked PCTPA staff to do this. I've asked the consultant team to at least do that thing. And bus stop issues never show up in short-range transit plans and in studies like this. So please look at the basic items that really generate ridership for public transit. Has nothing, and kiosk, forget about kiosks. And
Mr. Eklund?
Excuse me, this is important. Can I have just one more
I understand,
minute?
Peter, but your time has expired. I'm certainly happy to follow up with you as well as having staff follow up with you to address your questions and ensure we incorporate that, okay?
Excuse me, I'd like just 30 seconds more, if I could.
Well,
Okay.
we are going to, Peter, your time has expired. I'm sorry, but if I do that for you, I have to open it up for everyone that speaks. So we're going to have to stick with the time that's available. I'm certainly happy, though, based on what you said to this point, to have Kendall answer your concern. And then again, happy to follow up with you after the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start with the bus stop, actually services policy 6.0, but it would be a good addition if the board, your pleasure, but it specifically says to work with transit operators and partner agency to maintain improved quality of service that meets the needs of those folks. And it does talk about transit stop-offs, onboard, off-board and onboard, transit hours, real-time departures, all that we could easily add into that, a specific call out for bus stops, although for transit operators it would be inferred. And the other note is that on the transit bus stops, when you do, he's absolutely right, that is the place where people get their information. And to have kiosks, which are suggested in the plan, that do have up-to-date information, bilingual information available, that is in the plan. There's two things, but we could easily make a minor adjustment to accommodate the specific call out of a bus stop.
Okay, wonderful. I would suggest that we do so. Additionally, I would ask that staff follow up with Mr. Eklund. I know you have his contact information following the meeting.
And if I could, through the chair, really quickly, and we really always appreciate Peter's thoughtful, review of everything and comments. And we'll just say that, this is intended at a very high level to be a policy document and to guide our programmatic and project decisions. So it does not dive into project level details, which I think is where Peter's concern largely lies. But, as Kendall's already said, this will sort of inform that, and we will continue to work with Peter offline.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Kendall. Do we have anyone else online that wishes to comment?
No, Chair.
All right, wonderful. We will close the public comment portion and bring it back to the board for any discussions and action. So I'll open it up for any discussion or comments. I'm going to start to my far right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to my colleague over here, the mayor from Roseville, for his pointed questions on the policy. I just wanted to make a blanket statement that I appreciate staff's putting this together. We had a discussion with our lobbyist in DC last year on cap to cap, really focusing on the need to develop policies like this and to show what our efforts are in this particular area. This is something that's important for the federal government, for the state government, and so I do appreciate that we too will have some policies that will help guide us and also demonstrate that we take this seriously and that we're committed to doing what's right. So thank you very much, appreciate it.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other comment? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate the vision of this agency. I travel 65 between 80 and Pleasant Grove. I see the traffic coming down the other way. We have alternative transportation. We're visioning for bus rapid transit because we recognize that our freeways are getting more congested. And so a combination of transit, and we have commuter buses that are both Placer County and Roseville based that go down into Sacramento. We have third track that's coming in another 5 years. We are building a portfolio of not just roadway improvements, but alternative transportation. And I think I just want to make sure that the record reflects that. I understand advocates that are passionate for a specific mode of transportation and appreciate their input, but I do always wish that people would recognize what we are doing and not focus on a particular mode of transit.
Thank you, Bruce. Any additional comments?
Yes, please.
Yes, Paul.
Well, first, I want to endorse Alice's comments. I think they were spot on, but beyond that, I want to thank staff for this Placer-focused equity policy. I'm going to get out over my skis a little bit here. SACOG's race, equity, and inclusion policies are politically motivated. They have openly stated that they are efforting not just to make things equal, but to make up for past wrongs. They point to redlining, which has been gone for over 70 years. And so they are actively politically driven in their race, equity, and inclusion policies. These policies, I think, very well reflect Placer County and our mindset and our communities. We are not Sacramento County, as we said in the beginning of this. And even finding disadvantaged communities in Placer County is difficult because we're a blended community. So race, is it present? Absolutely, it's present. But it is distributed across our county. It is just part of our communities. We don't tend to think of it in the same way that Sacramento does. So very briefly, I think that this is very well focused, very reflective of Placer County. It is achievable, it is logical, and I really appreciate the effort. I think it's going to be well received and something I can get fully behind. I struggle with SACOG's ongoing policies, quite honestly. I would be happy to raise this up at SACOG and say, you might want to take a look at this. You might want to begin to follow this. I don't think they will. But so long story short, thank you for this. I think this is very practical, achievable, logical.
Great, thank you. I want to thank staff as well, Kendall. I want to thank your team for putting this together. You know, a approach of being fair and impartial, but also understanding that things can't be forced. We see that when we look at the state and its approach to affordable housing. When you have virtually no community that is achieving what they're being forced to do, it speaks volumes. So an approach that enables us to look at where appropriate and to apply the language that gives the ability to focus on an area, but not make it mandatory when it's not actually achievable. The focus on transit, and while I know there's always those who will be vocal about a belief that there's no effort being made, I believe there's a tremendous effort being made, and I thank staff for that, and we will continue to move that forward. So I thank you for that. I'm going to look to the board for action on this item to adopt, and I would ask that you reference the requested language changes as well.
Yeah, and thank you, and with the blessing of, and I forgot to include Auburn when I mentioned Loomis and Colfax.
I knew you were thinking about it.
You know,
You left
the
Lincoln out
endurance,
totally.
the endurance capital of the world, Auburn. I will move staff's recommendation with the change, the wording change where appropriate and grant funding exists in item T-4.0. Is that the right one, or E 1.0?
Yeah.
I'll second. Dowden Calvi, I'll second.
So a quick question, if I may. Do we want to include where grant funding is available? That really kind of limits that one.
Well, and why I was thinking of this, and Kendall, I love sustainable and cost-effective, your terminology of that. I know in Roseville, and I think in other jurisdictions, we've gotten grant funding for bus electrification. We've gotten grant, we've sought out grant funding. So just the availability, not securing it, but the availability of it. Yes, Kendall, come on.
May I?
Yeah, guide me. Give me some sideboards here.
And I thought your 40 questions, which were closer to 30, were fabulous. But I would say this, the point of that policy is to get the grant funding.
Yeah.
So if I was
Okay.
you, I would not include the grant, the rest of it's fine, I would not include the grant funding. I would use it to get the grant funding and not pretend you already had it, because it's like kind of like, if you give me the money, I'll do it, but it doesn't come across the same.
Okay.
So if you amend your motion, I'll second.
Yeah, no, where appropriate, right? Because it might not be appropriate in Colfax, but may be appropriate in Roseville. I'll amend my motion.
I'll second the amended.
We have a motion and a second to approve the item. Any further discussion? There being none, Sylvie, could we get a roll call vote, please?
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris. Burris. Cortez.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Howdeschelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
And I want to again thank my colleagues for indulging me, because I was going to move this to information only. But I was encouraged to ask all the questions I had. So, and there were only 30. Okay.
So the next item on our agenda today is the I-80 State Route 65 Interchange Truck Alternative Fueling Draft Feasibility Study. I believe David is going to present that item today.
Briefly getting organized here. There you go, turn the mic on. So just in terms of background here, we contracted with Jacobs Engineering to identify and evaluate sites near the I-80 State Route 65 interchange to support medium-duty and heavy-duty truck fast charging, as well as looking at the opportunity to evaluate hydrogen fueling within the vicinity of the interchange. And the idea there was that as part of the interchange, and because of way federal and state policies are going in terms of looking at a variety of ways to support projects, this particular facility was looked at in conjunction with the interchange planning and future design. And with that, we have a summary presentation today that Jacobs Engineering, Luke McNeil-Caird, and Luke Miner from Jacobs Engineering and myself will walk through. And there's no specific action at this time. As explained in the staff report, at the conclusion of this presentation, the next step is to pursue a request for information solicitation to see whether or not there's any private sector interest with these particular sites, as well as to inform us as to maybe there aren't interest within these particular sites. Move a little bit closer. But perhaps within the Interstate 80 corridor. And it's with that type of feedback that we would get through that solicitation process, that'll help us inform a grant opportunity that we would be pursuing with SACOG. And so with that, I'll initiate the presentation here. So our goals for the feasibility study were threefold. And so to evaluate the feasibility to establish, battery electric charging and hydrogen fueling infrastructure within the vicinity of the interchange. And it's also to support near-term grant funding applications for these particular facilities. And to that extent, whether or not it could help support any funding with respect to the interchange development. And lastly, this work here would provide the basis for future planning and environmental and engineering work for recommended sites. And we've been working with SACOG. SACOG has initiated a Northern California mega region zero emission study, and they've hired Frontier Energy as the consulting firm. Chris White is their project manager, and we've worked with Chris quite closely. And as part of the dialogue with the SACOG consultant, we found that within the Interstate 80 corridor, one of the values with our particular study is there will be a need for a number of connecting sites throughout the corridor. So you may all be aware of the large EV Watt charging facility that's going near Sacramento International Airport. And there will be needs for those, but there also will be need for maybe what you call light facilities, 5 acres or less, where appropriately placed within a corridor, such as Interstate 80 here in Placer County, there may be a need for those types of facilities. So that was valuable feedback from the SACOG consultant. And with that, Luke will take over the next several slides, and I'll conclude the presentation.
Morning, Chair Broadway, members of the board. Luke McNeil-Caird with Jacobs Engineering. I'm going to walk you through the feasibility study. We broke it up into a 3-step process here. We first wanted to figure out what's going to work here in terms of trucking, hydrogen or electric or both. We then looked at the sites around the Interstate 80 State Route 65 interchange. And then to finish it off, we looked at the funding opportunities that might come out of this. So as a first step, we looked at big data. We looked at Interstate 80 and State Route 65, and we looked at not only the number of trucks along these facilities, but also how far they're traveling, and if they stop, how long are they stopping at locations. And based on this information, looking at medium duty and heavy duty trucks, we determined that the right mix in this area is about 80% for electric charging and about 20% for hydrogen refueling. We then looked at 6 different, mostly vacant sites around the Interstate 80 State Route 65 interchange. Some were already developed, some were being held for future uses, and so that was able to narrow down to 3 sites. You see here in the middle, location number 3 along Roseville Parkway. That was the first site that we narrowed down. Then we have location 4 along Taylor Road and location 6 along Galleria Boulevard. So those 3 sites are the 3 that are being recommended to be carried forward, and I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into each of these sites. So location 3, this is along Roseville Parkway. It's actually below Roseville Parkway, so a ramp would need to be built off of Roseville Parkway down to this site. This site's about 14 acres at this location. And then location 4 is about 3 acres. It's right off of Taylor Road, right adjacent to the interchange. And then location 6 is at Galleria Boulevard. It is 16 acres and would have 2 access points right off of Galleria Boulevard. This is just south of Roseville Parkway. So when we talk about funding, the California Transportation Commission has prioritized 6 corridors throughout the entire state, and that includes Interstate 80. And so there is a great opportunity to not only get funding for this alternative fuel site, but also for potentially for improvements adjacent to the site. And there is the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program that a lot of the funding from these will be allocated to these 6 top corridors. And then lastly, we just looked at cost funding or cost estimates for the different sites. I do want to note that site 3 and 6 are landfill sites, historic landfill sites that have been capped. And so a lot of the improvements have to be done above the ground. And so you see those costs are higher than site 4. And I do want to mention that these costs don't include the land acquisition costs, so those do need to be determined. And then lastly, we did get a comment letter from the City of Roseville on the draft feasibility study. There's 4 specific things. Site 3 and 6 are adjacent to other uses, and so there was concern with that. Currently, the 3 sites do not have designated truck routes, so we would have to work through a process to get those locations designated truck routes. And then there would need, of course, to be transportation improvements, signalization, turn lanes to accommodate trucks entering these sites. And then lastly, Roseville Electric did provide some costs on how much it would take to extend electric service to these 3 different sites. And so that's very helpful information that we're going to incorporate into the final feasibility study.
Okay, here. So as part of the recommendations from the consultant team, there's 3 recommendations, and the first one is to carry the 3 identified sites into an environmental phase to attract a private company who may purchase and develop one of these sites. So before you get into the environmental phase, we want to do the request for information solicitation to see whether or not there's any interest. And if there, of course, is interest, then that would be a different conversation that we would all have, with that private party. So we wouldn't jump necessarily straight into environmental. We'd have to wait to see whether or not there's interest. Second recommendation is some of the sites were considered too remote from the interchange. And so the consultant team is recommending this be included as a separate fuel site corridor study. The third recommendation is that PCTPA consider a countywide alternative fuel study to look at future potential sites, considering proximity and distance for hydrogen refueling and electric charging. I think recommendation number 2 will ultimately, when we complete the final feasibility study, recommendations 2 and 3 will be combined as part of that countywide alternative fuel study, and that is the subject of what we are looking at with respect to SACOG grant opportunities that are upcoming. So we would be looking at a countywide alternative fuel study. And with that, I'd be glad to open it up for questions from the board and members of the public. We have the consulting team, myself, and other staff here to respond.
Great, thank you, David. I'll start to my left. Any questions for staff?
I have a few questions. Okay, so I understand that it's like, these are things that are being mandated, right? I understand that. And so I guess one of my first questions was already answered because there is grant money that's available and that's probably why it's being pursued. But maybe these aren't necessarily the questions, but more just concerns that there's a few things that concerns, like the road impacts, because I just feel like that will be like a draw. Notoriously, truck stops bring nefarious activity. There's just so many things that concern me about these being in our region, in Placer County, in Roseville. I mean, I don't live in Roseville, but we do a lot of things there. I don't know. There's just so many. So I guess I'm just curious. Has there been a study about all of those different impacts? About, I mean, I don't know. What's the value is really to have it in our region, to have it right here, in Placer County. Is there like a specific thing that you guys say? Like, is it just because of the grant money, or is it the emissions credit? Like,
Please go ahead. Well, so there's several points to consider. One, the state and the federal government have designated Interstate 80 as an alternative fuels corridor, and Interstate 80 is also a major truck route, as well as State Route 65. Both are included in the California freight planning effort. From the federal perspective, Interstate 80 is an extremely important freight truck route. And at least at this point in time, with various rules that have been enacted by the state, as well as by the federal government, we're moving towards electrification of a vehicle fleet. Now, whether that happens on a time frame that some people would like to see, or whether it occurs through a more market oriented approach, probably in the next 20 years, many of us will be driving electric vehicles or something like that. Now, and the same with with trucks and with hydrogen fueling facilities. It just seems to be gravitating in that direction. And what we have learned from SACOG is that while there's a need for large-scale truck fueling facilities for alternative fuels, there's also a need for many smaller sort of facilities. And we have, in this particular area here, a junction of two freight corridors coming together, and it seems to be sort of a logical point, to consider alternative truck fueling facility. Now, with that, it's easy to say that at the 30,000 foot level. One of the things that, and this is a feasibility study, so if there was market interest that was demonstrated through this request for information solicitation, the next thing you'd have to do is you really would have to work with that private developer in terms of the engineering and land use compatibility concerns expressed by Roseville staff. You'd have to work with the utility, Roseville Electric. They have concerns about how they would bring electricity to the site. And of course, there's concerns expressed by the California Trucking Association for the need for parking. That was a concern that they repeatedly expressed during the course of the study, that not just in Placer County, but the entire Interstate 80 corridor, there is just a lack of truck parking. And their members have to pull off on interchanges and on roads because of our of service limitations, and have to park in places that are not safe, right? And there's also the concern, with respect to land use compatibility, because truck stops, truck fueling facilities haven't always across the country had the most positive sort of image. And so that would need to be taken into account. All of that would have to be looked at as part of a next step, working with a private developer. But we're not there yet. We have to one, sort of do the feasibility study and then see whether or not there's market interest. Could come back exactly and saying, these three sites don't work for us. But we want to work with PCTPA because, you've got a corridor that's designated by the feds and the state as an alternative fuels corridor. It's a truck, freight corridor, and we want to work with you in looking at other sites. And so that's where the countywide study recommendation sort of comes into play. So I hope I answered sort of your question. It's not just driven by grant funding. It's sort of more, there's a larger policy perspective from state and federal governments that's sort of driving this issue.
I understood that part of it. I just see so many things going wrong in this being a disaster. But I mean, those are just my questions. So I guess we'll just see it when we get there.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
Really just a question of clarification, I think, on this. So as we began to discuss the possibility of such a facility, it was my understanding that we were doing so in no small measure because we were trying to bundle something very attractive to state and federal government with our need for dollars for the interchange, and perhaps be far more competitive in that process by doing so. I'm now hearing that we're kind of at is there any interest at all from the private sector in this? So have we shifted a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we have, David poked me and he said, you can answer that question. So I think it is. And honestly, these studies take, they take some time, and sort of the original impetus and reason for it is probably shifted and changed. And, that's something when you hire a consultant and then you change their scope of work, it's sort of, that's on us. But I would say your recollection is exactly right. I think there was early thinking that, hey, if we have this sort of electrification asset and we bundle it as part of the 8065 interchange, maybe it'll draw revenue, maybe it'll also make this project more attractive to the regulator community at the regional and state level. But as this has been ongoing, those regulators have been refining, CAPTI and how they're going to evaluate large capacity improving projects like an 8065 interchange. And so as we sit here today, I would tell you it is my opinion that no positive electrification, or alternative fuel site in and around bundled with the interchange unto itself is going to help the interchange, right? We're going to have to look to help the interchange through those regulatory and funding hurdles in other ways. And I'll talk about my federal advocacy in a moment, my executive director's report to go to DC and get our money back. So I think the regulatory thinking and the thought on this has changed as the consultant's been working through the project very diligently. And I think the greatest thing about the RFI, is to go out to the market, and David's already articulated this, and say, hey, what is your interest in this? You all look to turn a profit and do this. You're getting into this business. This is a huge, big business. Pilot is getting into this. Walmart is getting into this. Since the hours were changed on truck drivers, not only do we have a problem with truck parking on I-80, it is a national shortage of truck parking. It is crippling the freight industry. So we want to go and see that interest. But to directly answer your question, yeah, we have, I think, changed our approach as to what is the value proposition of this project relative to 8065 specifically. And I think that's why if we were to broaden out, if we were to say none of these three finalist sites are good, they're not compatible, I think there's a lot of lessons learned that we could look at if we were to broaden back and look at countywide.
So if you were to look countywide, I'm glad you said that. And looking at this photograph, I don't see an opportunity for this at the 8065 interchange. Is there a spot? One of the things that I've seen driving around the country is it is not unusual in other states for a facility like this to be located between the lanes of the freeway, keeping it contained to that freeway corridor. Is there a location that would allow such a design somewhere?
Yeah, I'll start and give you my thoughts, and then I'll let David and the team back me up or contradict me. I would say probably generally no, because the way the interstate was originally designed, it never envisioned this. When I started my public sector work, I worked for Florida's Turnpike. We had 460 miles of roadway. We had a 360-mile main line, and we had 8 service plazas on that had truck parking. And those were inside of these footballs. And so when those roadways were designed in the 60s, they envisioned these oases then. They built it out. It went from a 300-foot cross-section of right-of-way to 600 feet. And, we had all of that activity inside of that. Unless I'm missing something, I don't know that 80 was ever envisioned that way. So I would think this would have to be off-site, or unless you were going to go in the air.
Right, so don't do that, that's very expensive.
It's very expensive.
They managed to shoehorn in the Watt Avenue light rail station.
Yeah.
Between the lanes
Yep.
of 80, obviously. So it's just a passing thought. That might address some of Amanda's concerns,
Yep.
keeping it contained in that corridor.
Yep.
And frankly, make it more accessible to those users as well. Just a last thing, I really want to thank Luke for including hydrogen in this. I think that is actually the practical direction we're going to go on this. So, Luke, I guess the question I would have to you is you're considering 20% hydrogen at this point. Is there an expandability within that concept if the market drives one beyond the other to shift?
Absolutely. This was a first look at just kind of what the mix is, and obviously longer distance trucks was where we were looking at for hydrogen, but this is just to set what a site could look like. But obviously if the private sector comes in and says we want to do more hydrogen, then there's flexibility to do that.
Got it. Thank you. Could you put up the pretty picture design with all the solar field beyond it? That first image that you showed? I call them the pretty picture designs because nothing ever comes to fruition that is in these early conceptual drawings, the rendering.
And this is a rendering actually from Southern California.
Is it? Okay.
So this is actually being built in Southern California.
Okay. So do you conceive a facility here having the solar fields and the battery?
Not to that size.
Okay. Thus the conversation with Roseville Electric and others. Okay.
Yeah.
I have one more quick question while you're saying that. You said the longer distance, just as a point of reference, because I don't really know very much about this. So two questions. What do you consider to be long distance? And the other question is, and this might sound like a really dumb question, but because I don't know anything about electric vehicles, but does the battery drain, does the weight of the vehicle have anything to do with battery drain? Like how quickly, or do you understand my question?
I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Just to answer it directly, we were typically looking at longer haul, over 300 miles for, an 18-wheeler. Those are the types of trucks that we were looking at for hydrogen. Doesn't mean that any other type of vehicle couldn't be hydrogen, but those are the ones we identified for hydrogen.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because,
The battery lasts longer in an empty truck.
right.
The battery
Okay.
doesn't last as long going uphill.
Right.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
so I've driven some of these electric package cars, and they don't go from you cannot keep one charged, and they don't send them up the hill just even past Auburn for a day. So that's the thing. I was just curious if having an 18-wheeler, will the battery drain even quicker? You know what I'm saying? And so that was just a question for my own. Thank you.
Amanda's thinking of buying an 18-wheeler.
No, I'm just.
So keep an eye out. Tesla with Pepsi and Frito-Lay are running Tesla trucks up the 80 corridor right now. What I've noticed is, I've seen them pulled off and stopped. When the weather's bad up there, they're not going into that cold. That's going to drain their battery incredibly quickly. So there is this feasibility testing that's going on right now with Tesla.
Anything else, Paul?
No.
Okay, thank you. Bruce?
Can you skip over me, because Dan really has some good questions.
All right, well, I'll ask Suzanne first. Anything, Suzanne? Dan?
Thanks.
maybe a little bit in the details, but so my working assumption with hydrogen fueling is that it's a relatively quick process. It's kind of like going to the gas station in Topman, getting diesel fuel in terms of the amount of time it takes to actually transfer the fuel from the repository to the vehicle. With electric charging, there's this, how long does it take, and this may be what Amanda was touching on, to get a full charge, and what do you do while that's happening? So, my sense is with electric charging is where it's best done is when the vehicle's going to be parked for a long period of time and you're not actually using it, as compared to if you're trying to, get a 12-hour shift in or an 8-hour shift or whatever it may be, and you have to stop and take a certain amount of time out of your route to do that charging. So I don't need to get into the details of how long it takes to charge up an 18-wheeler. I do think that will play heavily on the viability of truck electric charging infrastructure and where it's best located. And I think there's this whole component of it of, how to charging, what does battery life look like? What are logical layover points that truckers are going to need to take advantage of anyway? And I think that's going to play into the market, or the likelihood of the private market being interested in a truck charging station or not. Are truckers actually going to use it? Or are they looking for other charging options that fit more naturally into kind of the downtime that they're going to have in their kind of day-to-day trucking operation? So I just offer that as a comment, and I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Dan.
Alice, do you have any?
Just interested a little bit on the SACOG coordination, because when I was reading through the report, it was over the weekend, but it seemed like SACOG was identifying other sites. Like, I was surprised to see some in North Auburn. And, so what is the coordination? Or did you already, I just was wanting to know a little bit more about that. I see here SACOG, they led a separate feasibility study for truck alternative fuel in Northern California for the mega region, and they identified 55 candidate locations. And, but they're just different. So I just wondered, was there coordination or?
No, there is coordination. SACOG, the consultant team consciously decided to not include planning studies such as ours and listing those sites because they're on their own path. And so, for better or worse, because we raised that comment early on and they said, we're not like excluding your particular study. We think it's valuable. We're just looking at other sites in addition to what you've been looking at.
It just seems to me that it should be more coordinated. This isn't a slam against us. It's just, again, I look at the study on page 95 and there's these 3 Auburn sites.
Right.
What's interesting is I didn't know anything about this. And I sit on SACOG, so I just found that very interesting.
Yeah.
So I have some additional discussion to have with SACOG, so I just kind of was wondering about that coordination piece,
So we meet with SACOG here on February 1st, so I can definitely convey that comment.
Yeah, we have Ophir Road, Musso Road, and New Airport Road.
Right.
Which are very different from what we're suggesting, so.
Correct. We were focused more around the interchange and or along the specific 80 corridor because that's where the trucks travel, and we felt that the further you got away from the interchange, the less viability with respect to the sites. And getting back to the original purpose of the study, looking at at helping support interchange funding. But we definitely can convey that comment. We've conveyed it in the past, and it's just their direction is different. So.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce?
2 quick questions. What is the vision for this site, wherever it ends up being? What's the vision for when it is operational? 2053? Remind me.
I don't believe we have a specific
All right.
timeframe. I mean, I think at this point, we're.
That's a sufficient answer.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, in my fatal flaw analysis, the 3 candidate sites, are they available?
Go ahead.
So we did coordinate with City of Roseville staff, and they were very vocal that while they are vacant, Site 6 had an active, or not active, but there was a developer looking at developing that site potentially
That's the old Berry Street Mall.
next to Galleria
Yep.
Boulevard. Yep. Site 4 is vacant, and so that is available. It's actually for sale. And then Site 3 at Roseville Parkway, that's the old landfill. It's City of Roseville owns it, so it is available technically.
Yeah, and then traffic impacts related to these sites were analyzed or not analyzed?
They weren't at the feasibility study, but the City of Roseville did a nice job of providing in their comment letter very specific things that would need to be, and I think that will help inform as we go out for information for the
Yeah,
future
I would just
developer.
add under comment that Site 4, I thought, was the site that Sutter had envisioned for one of their facilities. So that's the one that's, by Cattleman's, and you could just park them all in Cattleman's, I guess, right? Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
If I could, through the chair, just to chip in real quick to Vice Chair Haddishell's questions. I mean, one, as far as timeline, I don't think we could say it's going to be X date, but it's not going to be south of 10 years. And then 2, relative to the 3 Roseville sites, we had a final coordination call that I was on with the city and Roseville Electric last week. And as Luke said, they voiced their concerns. And, the commitment we made to them on that call is that, we're not going to move forward with any site that doesn't have, local concurrence, and so at this point, we're wrapping up a process. We're learning from it, but we don't want to get ahead of that process. We want to do the RFI, but, I think we're very confident that we'll be looking to take our lessons learned and look at other sites across the county.
Thank you, Matt. Trinity.
So I'm obviously full of opinions on this one as usual, but I'll try to keep it brief. I'm a little concerned about the fact that we are looking at potentially a 10+ year timeline for completing this project and what that's going to mean as far as expansion. And one of the questions I had for staff is as far as, I know we're talking about trying to keep things rather local to the interchange, but for the purpose of the actual users of this facility, where they are coming and going, is it really the most advantageous idea for us to be trying to put them in an already very dense area when we have opportunity potentially, on the more rural south end of I-80 or up on the rural north end of I-80 or in the rural outskirts of 65, all of which are going to feed that same area? Because I can tell you right now, while there's definitely a lot of hesitation I'm hearing from other board members about wanting these kind of sites near their jurisdictions, I can tell you overwhelmingly, I want it where I am. Now, Colfax obviously doesn't have the city limit capacity for something like this. So I don't have a tax incentive for wanting this facility, but from a logistical perspective and tying up the I-80 corridor for feasibility over the mountain, hydrogen fuel cell in particular, I think has a home up here where battery storage does not. And when it comes to power outages and severe weather events, this is where the freeway gets shut down and this is where we need refueling. And I would be very, very remiss if I did not say that very strongly I would like to have this type of a hydrogen fueling facility up here on this part of the I-80 corridor to feed elsewhere. So I'll go ahead and digress, but I just wanted to throw those thoughts out there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Trinity. Just one question for me and Luke or the team in relationship to the private funding. So you gave the example of the facility that's being built in Southern California. Is that private funding that's building that, do you know? And are there significant opportunities to secure that type of funding, so when you put this out, do you expect, to have a strong response?
I think that's, and I'll start and then pitch to Luke. And first of all, back to, I want to address something that Director Burr said. I would, just to keep this quick, because I know it's late in the day, ditto. Staff completely concurs with what she's saying, and this gets back to Director Joyner's original question about purpose. I think from a PCTPA perspective, our purpose for, like, why do we want to be in this business? Why do we want to even do this at all? It's not to try to make 8065 more financially valuable or regulatorily appealing to others. So the question, I think, for us as a public sector agency is, you know, this is coming, alternative fuels are coming. What is the appropriate role for us as an entity to help that inside of the I-80 corridor? And, you know, we're obviously not in the profit-seeking business, and we wouldn't do that well. So, you know, it's our role to sort of engage with the private sector, see what interest they might have. They're going to be a much better entity to deliver this. And so at this point, you know, that's what we want to do. How do we help, you know, logistically this inside of Placer County? That's our goal as an entity. And then, yes, the vast majority of this funding would come from private sector, you know, people who want to seek profit. Luke, would you like to add on to that?
Just quickly, I'll you know, the Sacramento International Airport site was mentioned. That's where a private firm came in and partnered with the county, and they kind of took it from, you know, start to finish in terms of securing grant funding and investing their own private funding into it. So that's what we'd be looking at as the next step is there that private firm that would be willing to invest and also help seek state or federal grant funding?
Great. Luke, do you know the time frame that has taken for them? I mean, we talked about how long, and Trinity did a great job of expressing concern regarding, you know, that longevity of implementation. Do you know how long they're?
I don't know offhand. They've just secured the grant funding. I don't know when it's going to break ground.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, those are all the questions the board appears to have. I will open it up. Is there anyone from the public here in chambers that wishes to comment on this item?
Hi, thank you. Mike Karabedian. Well, let's stop here on this and not waste any more money on it. There's no place for truck traffic in any of those three locations, as those of you who know the area are certainly familiar with. For those of you who don't know, Galleria turns into Harding, Harding turns into Galleria, the same street, and at the corner of Lead Hill and Harding is a school. I don't know what it's like in the morning, but I've seen that a few times in the afternoon when the school people waiting in the middle left-right turn lane goes all the way to Atlantic, if not farther, back there, and it's traffic the other way. There's no place for a truck anywhere that might bring them people onto Harding and Galleria. So, I mean, it's really a non-starter. I mean, I was thinking, hearing this, it's like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. There's just no place for it. Whether there's a place for this somewhere else in the county, I can't think of anywhere north of I-80 or south of I-80 for that matter. I just don't think it's the place for it. I've traveled the country many times back and forth and stop at truck stops, and I don't see how this even begins to fit the bill for that and what we're learning. So it doesn't look like there's been any consideration or familiarity with what's going on the streets now. I can't, people who first move here, this area, including me, don't understand that you use the Roseville Parkway to get around. It's a place where people go through there to get lots of places they're going. And to imagine a turnoff for a truck facility along that parkway near the bridge, before you get to the other major, it's inconceivable, really. There's no reason to go further. If there's going to be a study elsewhere in the county, it would be time to start over. So what do we do, and how do you consider where to go from here? I don't have a recommendation. But just looking at this and seeing those different, and the expense of building on a landfill. You know, these landfills are capped. They're leaking gases and things like that. The idea of having to build on the platform above them, or how they would engineer getting, foundation below it. is another kind of inconceivable and very expensive thing that I can't imagine. I'm not an engineer, but I just can't imagine that being attractive, though it would be apparently some other kinds of businesses are considering doing that. So I wish I could say good luck with this issue, if there is any place for it, but I don't think so.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else here in chambers that wishes to comment on this item? Sylvie, do we have anyone online? Okay, great. This was a presentation only, so I want to thank the team for the presentation. It's greatly appreciated. We'll move to the next item, which is item J, the Executive Director's Report.
Okay, I think there's a slide, Corey, if you could go one more. Thank you. Thanks, Corey. Well, thanks, everybody. I know it's been a long day. Just a few things to talk about. One, our office transition is complete. And I just wanted to put out there publicly, if you're part of a public entity or if anybody has need for any sort of conference room space, we have fully functioning video capabilities and, are happy to host anyone. So just want folks to know that we do have space that's available to other public sector entities if they need anything over in the Douglas corridor. 8065 federal funding activity. I think we met on the 6th of December. I hadn't had a chance to give you an update on this. On the 12th, I had the great fortune to have a meeting with the Office of the Secretary, with Secretary Buttigieg's office, and they gave us an hour, which is a really good sign. And we had a very productive meeting about 8065, explained to them not only the project details, but a bit about the county and what we're looking to do with a ballot measure in November. And essentially said, when we know we need to come up with a local match and everything else is moot after that if we don't. But when we do that, we're going to come back and look to you as the owners of the federal interstate system and ask for you to be, financial partners with us in the rebuilding and improvement of the 8065 interchange. And they heard that, and they asked really great questions. It was a very collaborative meeting. And I would say they were extremely excited about that. So we will look to move forward with a RAISE grant application, which gets you into the tens of millions of dollars, sometime probably in the 2025 cycle after we have a local option match to leverage. I then also was in DC in the first week of January, and I had a meeting, an impromptu conversation with the Build America Bureau. These are the folks inside of the USDOT who cover TIFIA loans. So they don't give us free money. They don't give us grant money. Really, it's not free money. It's our money back. But what they do is they want to give loans out to infrastructure projects, and they very much want to loan money. And they, too, are very excited about our 8065 project. Why is that important to us? Because that's very inexpensive money and it will keep our financing costs down. So instead of us having to go out to the private market and issue debt based on the sales tax measure, we can borrow debt at a much cheaper rate from the federal government. I've had the opportunity to put together TIFIA loan packages in the past, and it's just the best money you can get. So just another quick update on that. CARTA. So you'll hear this word. Some of you who are members of SACOG as well have already heard this word. We've talked about this, but just a reminder, we now have a new JPA in the region. It's the Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority, or CARTA. This is a three-party agreement between YOLO TD, Caltrans, and SACOG. It is to allow for SACOG as the RTPA over YOLO TD to put forward a tolling application for the 80 managed lanes over in Yolo County. We, as PCTPA, have been coordinating and collaborating with our regional partners, and we will bring back to you in February an item to take action on to appoint a non-voting director of the CARTA board. None of this applies to our county. We are not considering pricing or tolling inside of the county, but we will be at the table to help the region think through this. And then into the future, we have two options. If we ever decided we wanted to do this, we could join CARTA if we liked what they were doing, or because we are our own RTPA, we could form our own entity into the future. So We have not given away any local control, and we have the ability to sort of influence this regional policy that's going to be just south of us. So that's a quick update on CARTA. Happy to take questions. And then also just a little movie teaser on the funding measure. We will bringing you the ordinance and expenditure plan in February. General Counsel, myself, Solvi, we've been working on getting the language right, working with Rick on the capital program, finalizing the numbers. We've got that all ready to go. We will then engage in our sort of road show in the spring to go out to all the municipalities and the county to seek approval of our expenditure plan. So that is the end of my report. Happy to field questions.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions? No? All right, next item is item K, that is board.
Public comment on that agenda item?
Oh, sure. If you'd like to comment on the report, sure.
Thank you. Just very brief, about 8065. Well, it's hard to know what to say, frankly, but I reminds me when the California Transportation Commission came here, I think for the first time, before the last time, was what, 4 or 5 years ago, and they had a tour. They had a bus tour, and I felt that tour really didn't present the problem or what might need to be done to fix it. I didn't have any objection when they did the fix for the off-ramp from 80 westbound, because there was definitely a backup hazard there, traffic hazard there that had to be relieved. I don't know if that has to be changed for a redo of that interchange, but the past approach, other than that particular part of the interchange, I don't see it as being adequate in knowing what to do, and how somebody from Washington can imagine what it's like here based on what they're told. But maybe it's possible. Well, I guess that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, well, no, I do want to say something about the funding measure. Quoting Darrell Steinberg, Mayor, he said, speaking at City Council hearing, he said, "I don't think 2024 is the year for a ballot measure to raise the sales tax. Voters are in a bit of a sour mood," he said. "Times are tough and the world is a little bit fragile."
All right, thank you.
If I could, through the chair, I neglected to forget one thing off my executive director's report, because, it wasn't on the slide, and if it's not on the slide, I forget to say it, right? But I did want to just take one final thing in our marathon meeting this morning to make a good, positive announcement, and that's the fact that, as part of our performance reviews, we have the opportunity to review our people and award merit, and I'd like to recognize that Mike Costa has been promoted to the position of principal planner for PCTPA, and I want us to publicly say thank you, Mike, and we're really excited to see what you're going to do in your new role. So thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would wish to comment on the report? No one here in chambers, anyone online? No, great. All right, we'll move to the next item, which is board direction to staff. Is there any request from the board? No. No? All right, great. Item I is just informational items. They were included in our packet. Item M we had moved. Item N is going to be moved off calendar and to a future date. We expect to review that at our next meeting, which is February 28th, 2024. With that, I want to say that I appreciate the board's support of me, and I promise that this will not be a trend. I know it was a long meeting today, and I'll do my best to keep our meetings much shorter, but with that, we are adjourned.
Wait. You can't do that. Mr. Joyner, Dowden Calveo, and myself experienced a long meeting at SACOG recently. So, yeah. So, we're kind of conditioned.
Okay, thank you. And again, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.